Picture a building designed to look like hope. That's the trick with asylums. The architects understood the optics, wide stone facades, elegant wings spreading east and west like arms reaching out. A cupola at the centre, visible from miles away, rising above the trees as if to say, "We are civilized here. We are scientific. We are kind." Now walk inside, past the front parlour where the inspectors take their tea, past the corridors where the cooperative patients sew and read and demonstrate their recovery to whoever happens to be visiting that week, past the grounds where gardeners cultivate roses specifically because roses look well in the annual report. Keep walking, past the second corridor where it's quieter, past the point where the floors stop being waxed, past the door that's always locked from the outside but never from the inside, because that distinction matters enormously, and nobody in authority wants to think about it. Keep walking. There, that's where you are. This is the back ward of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, 999 Queen Street West, Toronto, Ontario, in the year 1873. A place that holds approximately 650 patients on the capacity of about 400. A place where the province of Ontario sends the people it has stopped knowing what to do with. Where families send the inconvenient, the frightening, the exhausting, the expensive to maintain. A place where you could walk through the front gate on a Tuesday morning and never be seen again by anyone who matters. It smells like, well, you know what it smells like, even before I describe it. There's a part of the brain that already knows. Actually, let me back up. I make these history for sleep stories, and given that this one is about a 19th century psychiatric institution, I genuinely have no idea if you're going to fall asleep or just lie there in the dark thinking about everything wrong with the world. Both are valid responses to what we're about to go into. Either way, get comfortable. We're going in, one day, one person, everything they would have seen and heard and survived, or tried to. Here we go. Your eyes open to grey. Not darkness, exactly. Grey. The particular grey of early morning in a room with one window and 17 other people in it. For a moment, half a second maybe, you've forgotten where you are. Then it comes back. The smell arrives first, as it always does. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't ease you in gently. It is simply there, total and immediate, the way cold is total and immediate when you step outside in winter. Urine, soaked into the floorboards over years, over decades, impossible to scrub out no matter how much carbolic acid the attendants use. And they don't use much carbolic acid, because carbolic acid costs money, and the back wards have a different budget from the front wards, and the difference between those budgets is visible in every surface of this room. Beneath the urine, the sour warmth of bodies sleeping too close together, unwashed hair, the particular sweetness of long illness, something animal and fermented, the smell of people who are not getting enough to eat and whose bodies have begun to know it. Beneath that, the wet wool smell of the grey blankets, damp from the breath of 18 women in a room with insufficient ventilation. And underneath all of it, something else, something that took you weeks to identify. The smell of a building that has absorbed too much suffering to let it go. Wool and limestone and old wood and grief, layered so deeply into the walls that you suspect they'll never come out. Not with carbolic acid, not with anything. Welcome to Ward 7. Welcome to the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, Toronto, in the third year of the Dominion of Canada, when the city has 56,000 people, and exactly none of them are thinking about you this morning. You're lying on a straw mattress on an iron bed frame, third from the left in the second row. The mattress is damp. It's always damp, from last night's sweat, or from Mrs. Connolly in the bed beside you, who can no longer always tell when she needs the chamber pot, or from the general respiration of 18 women breathing the same air for 8 hours. The iron of the bed frame is cold where your arm has slipped off the mattress in the night and touched it. Your arm pulls back. The cold is not subtle. The blanket is thin. You pulled it up over your nose sometime after midnight, trying to filter the smell, and now your nose is cold again. Outside the single window, barred, 12 panes facing the inner courtyard rather than the street, Toronto is doing whatever Toronto does at what your body estimates to be not yet 6. The city sounds are just beginning. A milk cart somewhere on Queen Street, the particular rattle of it. A dog. The creak of this building settling in the November cold. The stones contracting as they do every morning. A slow, deep sound that's almost a voice. You close your eyes. You open them again. You're still here. Your name is Eleanor Marsh. You are 29 years old. You have been in this building for 4 months, 2 weeks, and, if you've been counting the cycles of window light correctly, and you have been counting since your 3rd week when you understood that nobody else was going to count on your behalf, 3 days. Before this building, you lived on Jarvis Street, in a respectable house with a respectable husband, a respectable parlour, and a respectably miserable life. Before that, you were Eleanor Haigh, daughter of a clockmaker in Hamilton, 60 miles west of here, which might as well be on the moon. The clockmaker's daughter who learned to read her father's technical manuals before she was 12, who copied out pages of text just to practice the shape of letters, the weight of a pen, the discipline of precision, who won a prize at school, 3 books, geography and history and a collection of verse, and kept them on a shelf in her bedroom and read them until the spines cracked open and had to be repaired with glue. That girl married Charles Marsh, solicitor, when she was 22. That was what one did. And when Eleanor Marsh, née Haigh, began to speak her opinions in her own parlour, to disagree with her husband in front of guests, to write letters to the newspaper about the conditions of working women in the city, careful letters, reasonable letters, the kind of letters a man might write without comment. Her husband consulted a physician. The physician consulted his medical textbooks. The medical textbooks consulted the theory of female hysteria, which has an answer for everything. And on a Tuesday morning in July, a carriage arrived at the house on Jarvis Street, and 2 men in good coats helped Eleanor Marsh into it, and her husband stood on the front step and did not wave. Voluntary admission, the paperwork said. Eleanor, who had not agreed to anything, found this interesting. She finds it interesting still. It is one of the things she turns over during the long afternoons when there is nothing to do. The specific efficiency of that word, voluntary, and the specific efficiency of a system in which the word could be used this way without anyone being required to examine it too closely. This is the thing she does to keep her mind working. She examines things closely. With the clockmaker's precision, the care for mechanisms, the attention to how the individual parts produce the overall function. The pump that needs to be worked to keep the water flowing. Stop working it, the water stops. She is not going to let the water stop. Here is what they don't tell you about the provincial lunatic asylum. The building is actually quite beautiful from the outside. John George Howard designed the original structure in the 1840s, and he was good at his work. The central block is Georgian, symmetrical, with a slightly raised centre section and wings extending to either side. The grounds were landscaped. There were flower beds once, you've been told by Agnes, who's been here 11 years and remembers everything. When Dr. Workman was superintendent and still believed in the possibility of this place. Dr. Workman believed in what they called moral therapy, fresh air, useful occupation, treating patients as human beings rather than problems to be stored. He wrote about it. He gave lectures. He had a vision of a place where suffering could be witnessed with intelligence and addressed with something other than locks. Dr. Workman is still technically superintendent this November of 1873, though you haven't seen him on Ward 7 in over a month. And on Ward 7, a month might as well be forever. The building currently houses approximately 650 people. It was designed for 400. The mathematics of that gap is not abstract. It is present in every corner of the back wards in the specific, visible form of decisions made when space runs out and money doesn't stretch. And the province keeps sending more people, and someone has to figure out where to put them. Beds pushed closer together until there's barely room to walk between them. Corridor space converted to sleeping space. The dining room that seats half the ward at a sitting because it cannot hold everyone at once. The good wards have space between the beds. The good wards have windows that open in summer. The good wards have patients who speak in full sentences and wear their own clothing, and sometimes receive visitors who sit in a room with chairs and a table and describe the visit later in terms that contain words like parlour and tea. Ward 7 does not receive many visitors. Ward 7 is where you put the ones you've stopped expecting to get better. The ones whose paperwork has moved from hopeful to resigned, whose files now use the word chronic, whose improvement is no longer the operative question. The operative question for the back wards is maintenance. Maintenance of the body at the minimum sufficient level. Maintenance of the institution's capacity to accept more patients. Maintenance of the schedule, the routine, the daily structure that keeps 18 women and their collective difficulty from becoming something unmanageable. That is the entire project of Ward 7. Not healing, not recovery, not the moral therapy Dr. Workman wrote lectures about. Maintenance. At 6 o'clock, or thereabouts, because the bell that marks the quarter hours is 2 floors up and muffled through the stone, and you've learned that thereabouts is the level of precision available to you here. The day attendant comes in. Her name is Mrs. Pollock. She's perhaps 45, short, solid, with forearms that suggest a life of physical work and a face that started with kindness in it, and has had that quality gradually worn away, not by cruelty but by repetition, the specific erosion of doing a hard job for not enough money for too many years. She is not cruel. She is not kind. She exists in the space between, which is where most people end up when the work is difficult and the pay doesn't account for the difficulty. She carries a lamp into the room, sets it on the table near the door. The light spreads across the grey wool blankets, across the shapes of women at various stages of waking, across the iron bed frames and the stone floor. Up, she says. That is all. No gradation, no preamble, just up. Some women respond immediately, with the practiced obedience of bodies that have been doing this long enough that the response has become reflexive, operating below consciousness. Agnes at the far end of the room is already sitting upright. Agnes has been here 11 years. Her body knows the architecture of this building the way it once knew, presumably, the architecture of whatever home came before, automatically, without thought, with the particular confidence of deep familiarity. Agnes is out of bed and reaching for her dress before Mrs. Pollock has put down the lamp. Mrs. Connolly doesn't wake easily. She never does. Mrs. Pollock goes to her bedside and shakes her shoulder, not roughly, but with the economical firmness of someone who has shaken this particular shoulder approximately 800 times and knows exactly the force required. You're already sitting up. You've learned. The women who rise fastest get the chamber pot first. This sounds trivial. It is not trivial. There are 3 chamber pots for 18 women, and they're emptied once in the morning and once in the evening. And if the morning window closes before you've used one, the rest of the day has a particular quality that you've stopped trying to describe to yourself because the description is worse than the thing. Your feet hit the floor. The floorboards are cold. This is November, and the single cast-iron stove at the far end of the room puts out heat that reaches, at optimistic estimate, the middle 4 beds. Your bed is near the window. The window is single-glazed with failing putty around the frame. You wake up every morning with the specific bone-deep cold of sleeping 8 hours next to glass that is doing its inadequate best against a Canadian November. Your feet are always the last thing to warm up. You wrap the grey wool shawl around your shoulders. They gave it to you when your own clothes were taken away. The good wool dress, the proper stockings, the leather gloves, all of it inventoried and stored somewhere you've never seen. The shawl they gave you in their place scratches your neck. It has always scratched your neck. You've mostly stopped noticing. Mostly is doing a significant amount of work in that sentence. The morning routine takes 45 minutes and contains the following steps, which you have now performed approximately 136 times. You use the chamber pot. You dress in the clothing from the hook beside your bed. The grey cotton dress, 2 sizes too large, cinched at the waist with a drawstring you've retied every day for 4 months trying to make it approximate a fit. And the grey wool shawl and the cotton stockings that have been darned so many times. The original weave survives only in theory. And the brown leather shoes that belong to someone else before they belong to you, and that rub the outside of your left ankle if you walk more than a quarter mile. You line up at the washroom with 6 women at a time to stand at a zinc basin and wash your face and hands in water that was cold when it was poured and is colder now. Having sat in the basin since the attendant poured it 10 minutes ago, in a room where the temperature is below 40 degrees, the soap is hard yellow lye soap. It cracks your knuckles. You've had cracked knuckles since August. They bleed sometimes in the cold, small bright beads at the joints of your index fingers. You press them against your dress to stop the bleeding, and dress is grey so the blood doesn't show, which you've decided is either a small mercy or an instruction. You comb your hair with the communal comb, which is not as bad as it sounds because you've developed a system. You go first when possible, which requires the same strategy as the chamber pot. Be fast and twist it back and pin it with the short, thin institutional pins they gave you in place of your own hairpins, which were taken with everything else. The pins are inadequate. Your hair doesn't stay up the way it used to. By midday there are always loose pieces against your neck, dragging against the collar, a small constant irritation. This bothers you more than it should, or perhaps exactly as much as it should. It's difficult to calibrate the correct level of distress about having your hair come down, when calibration is something you're having to relearn from the ground up. Then breakfast. The dining room is 2 floors down and across a section of courtyard that's been partially enclosed with wooden boarding to keep out the wind. Partially enclosed. The wind knows this. You know this. On cold mornings you walk through the boarding enclosure with your shawl pulled tight and your neck bent and your breath coming in rapid white clouds, and by the time you reach the dining room door your ears are cold enough to hurt. Agnes walks without pulling her shawl tight. 11 years of November mornings has made the cold simply weather, simply the texture of this particular place, no more notable than the colour of the walls. The dining room holds 80 women at the long tables. There's another sitting after yours. The smell when you enter is oatmeal, plain oatmeal, salted, nothing else. And underneath it something harder to name, something that's the accumulated smell of many bodies in an enclosed space over many years, absorbed into the wood of the tables and the brick of the walls the way grief is absorbed into the stone upstairs. You sit where you always sit, third from the left at the second table. If you sit elsewhere, Mrs. Pollock directs you back with a look that isn't anger but is its own distinct language, the language of an institution that operates on predictability, on the consistent geography of bodies in their assigned positions, and that experiences deviations from this as friction. The oatmeal arrives in earthenware bowls, thick-lipped bowls that are heavy and hold the heat reasonably well, which is the best thing you can say about them. A tin cup of water beside each bowl. On Wednesdays and Saturdays, though the schedule is irregular and sometimes shifts without explanation, there is also a piece of bread. This is not a Wednesday. This is not a Saturday. You eat the oatmeal. There are no words available to describe how the oatmeal tastes, because it doesn't taste like anything that has words. It tastes like salt and water and grain, the same salt and water and grain it tasted like yesterday, and the morning before yesterday, and the 40 mornings before that. The consistency is somewhere between thin and thick, which means it neither fully satisfies nor slides down clean, which means your body accepts it without registering it as food. Exactly. More as fuel, as the minimum required to continue the day. What you think about eating the oatmeal is not the oatmeal. You think about your father's kitchen in Hamilton. The bread his housekeeper made that was still warm from the oven and had a crust that crackled when you pressed your thumb into it and left an indentation. The pot of blackberry jam on the second shelf of the cupboard. The apples they kept in the cellar, and the way the warmth of the kitchen drew the apple smell up through the floorboards in autumn. Fruity and cool and specific. The smell of that particular kitchen in that particular season. The smell of being 14 and not yet understanding that the world would require significant navigation. You eat the oatmeal. Agnes, across from you, eats without expression, without looking up, both hands around her bowl, the deliberate concentration of someone who understands that the bowl is the entire world for the next 3 minutes. She doesn't look up until the bowl is empty and the cup is empty. Then she looks up. She looks at you looking at her. Neither of you says anything. Agnes has a face that has learned to give very little away. 11 years has done that. Or perhaps it was always that face, the teacher's face, the face that watches a room without being watched watching, and 11 years has simply confirmed it. There are 18 women on Ward 7. You've been cataloguing them since your second week, because cataloguing, giving each person a name, a history, a context, even when those things have to be partly constructed from fragments, felt like a way of keeping the mechanism running. A discipline, the pump that needs working. Mrs. Connolly is perhaps 60, Irish, with grey-white hair and a face that still carries the ghost of an earlier beauty in its bone structure. She came in with the tremors and the confusion that you've since learned to identify as the specific damage that gin does to a brain over 30 years of heavy use. Her husband committed her. Her husband died 6 months after she arrived. There's no one now. The tremors have worsened. Her good days are days when she knows where she is. On her bad days, she calls for someone named Patrick. Over and over, a low, soft, repeated calling, like water finding the same groove. And you've never been able to determine if Patrick was her husband or a son, or someone from a life so far back it's become myth. Harriet is 22, the youngest on the ward. She came in from the east end of the city and is listed in whatever paperwork exists as melancholia with incoherence, which in practice means she doesn't speak. This isn't how she arrived. She spoke when she was admitted, according to Mrs. Pollock, who doesn't often volunteer information but occasionally does when she's doing the evening routine and the ward is quiet and she's been at it long enough that she's not quite performing the attendant anymore, and just becomes a tired woman doing a late shift. She spoke when she was admitted, and then she stopped, and whatever bridge was crossed to get to that stopping is not a bridge you found a way to ask about. Harriet sits at the window sometimes and watches the sky for hours, her hands in her lap folded, her face still and open toward whatever she sees out there. Twice you've seen her cry in complete silence, tears running steadily without any change in her expression, no sound at all, as if the crying is happening to her body while the rest of her is somewhere else. Both times were in the evening. Both times the rest of the ward was in the particular state of pretending not to notice, because witnessing requires something that isn't always available at 8 o'clock at night in Ward 7. Margaret was a cook before. She talks about it in the evenings, when the ward quiets, describing dishes with a focus and precision that is remarkable to sit near. The temperature the butter must be, the exact moment the sauce begins to change texture, the specific give of well-made pastry under the thumb. She'll go through the steps of a dish the way a musician goes through a piece, from memory, with love, with attention to every detail that makes the difference between something ordinary and something that matters. She's been here 3 years. She was committed after threatening her employer's husband with a kitchen knife. Agnes told you the rest of it, in a whisper one evening, what the employer's husband had done to prompt the knife. Agnes didn't tell you explicitly, and you didn't ask explicitly, because some things are understood at one level of language, and requiring them to be spoken at another level serves only to make the understanding heavier to carry. 3 years for Margaret. The knife, apparently, not something she's been determined to be past. And then 8, 9 other women. Women whose names you know and whose faces have become as familiar as any face can become when you spend 24 hours a day within 40 feet of it. Women who are, some of them, clearly, suffering in ways that require care, whose minds have moved into territory that they can't navigate alone. Women who belong somewhere that can offer real help, and women who are here because someone found them inconvenient. This is the question that keeps the pump working, the terrible clarifying question that you turn over during the long afternoons when there's nothing to do but pace and think and refuse to stop thinking. Who is here because they need to be? Who is here because someone needed them to be gone? And the deeper, darker question, is there a difference after enough time? This is the thing most people don't know from outside. The patients work. Not on Ward 7. Ward 7 is what the institution classifies as a chronic ward, a word that means we have stopped expecting improvement which in practice means the ward has been removed from the economy of recovery. But in the better wards, the cooperative wards, the wards where the official visitors are walked through, the patients operate the laundry. They work in the kitchen. They tend the gardens that produce a substantial portion of the food consumed on the premises. The logic: you found a copy of an old superintendent's report in the small room where the attendants keep their coats, and you read it with the focused hunger of someone who hasn't had anything to read in 4 months, is that useful occupation promotes mental health. That work provides structure, dignity, purpose, moral therapy. The superintendent wrote about it with evident conviction. The practical reality is that the asylum runs, in significant part, on unpaid patient labour. The laundry handles the institution's linens. It also holds a contract with several Toronto hotels. The kitchen produces 3 meals a day for 600 people. The gardens save the institution money it would otherwise spend with commercial suppliers. Nobody in the official reports appears to find this arrangement worth examining. What Ward 7 does, because the chronic ward is deemed too unpredictable for the laundry or the kitchen, is so. Every morning from 8 until noon, you hem sheets. The sheets come in a basket at 8 o'clock. They're unfinished at one end, a raw edge that needs to be folded twice and stitched down. The beds in the ward are pushed back against the walls to make room for the long table, and 18 women sit along it and hem sheets for 4 hours in the grey morning light. The needle is blunt. It's always blunt. You've asked twice for a sharper needle, and been told there are no sharper needles, which is not true. You've seen sharper needles. You've noticed the difference in the ones that come in different batches. But the category of things you know that don't match the category of things you're being told has grown so large, it's begun to have its own geography. You've stopped making it a point of friction. The blunt needle goes through the cotton, slowly, with more pressure required at each entry, and after 4 hours your index finger and thumb have the ache of that specific resistance worn into them. Your fingers are toughening. The first weeks the needle left soft indentations in the skin of your index finger from the pressure. Now there's callus there. A small raised pad, slightly yellowish, the skin thickened. A record of every sheet. At noon they take the needles back. They count them carefully. You know this is a safety measure and you understand why it's a safety measure, and you also understand what it says about the assessments being made of the women in this room. And you've decided to hold that understanding lightly rather than spend energy being offended by it. The energy is needed elsewhere. You hem 4 sheets. In a cold sitting, 7 or 8 in a warmer one. The sheets leave for the laundry. They come back through the system. Presumably they end up on beds somewhere in this building, possibly on beds in the front wards with the curtains and the proper visiting hours and the patients who wear their own clothing. You fold the finished sheet, set it on the pile, take up another, fold and stitch, fold and stitch. The needle through the cotton, the thread pulling taut, the small repetitive movement of your right hand going mechanical enough that your mind can go somewhere else entirely. Your mind goes somewhere else entirely. This is deliberate. This is the pump. You think about your father's workshop. The long bench covered in clock movements in various states of disassembly, the brass gears and the hairsprings and the tiny screws that were so small they required the special tool to manage them. The smell of machine oil and brass shavings and the particular dry warmth of a room with a small wood stove working well. Your father's hands moving over a movement with a patience and precision that was never hurried, never agitated, because agitation is the enemy of small work. The sound of the workshop, which was the sound of many clocks ticking at slightly different rates, a layered and irregular rhythm that was so particular to home when you were a child that you associated the sound with safety, the way other children associated safety with their mother's voice or the smell of cooking. You haven't heard a clock tick in 4 months. The building has a bell, 2 floors up. It has a low rumble from the boiler house, but no ticking. The specific sound of time being measured in small regular increments, present, 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 is absent. You miss it with a specificity you didn't anticipate. You think about the room in your house on Jarvis Street where you kept your books. Not a library, just a small room off the landing, originally meant as a sewing room that you had filled with shelves, history, natural science, philosophy, your father's technical manuals, the prize books from school, their spines long since cracked and repaired with glue, the bound volumes of the newspaper going back several years. Charles had never objected to the books. He'd objected to what they made you think. Most specifically to one letter in the Globe which a colleague of his had mentioned at dinner, at which point Charles's face had done something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but was some compound of both that you'd spent the remainder of the evening trying to read and failing. The letter was about the admission procedures at this very institution. You find that detail interesting now, turning it over in the long afternoons, examining it for its mechanism. The rumour reaches Ward 7 on a Wednesday. You know it's Wednesday because it's a bread day, and on this particular bread day the bread comes late, which Agnes says means something unusual is happening in the kitchen, and the something unusual is that an inspector from the provincial government arrived this morning to assess conditions. His name, arriving in fragments through Mrs. Pollock, to the morning attendant, to Agnes, who hears everything, is Dr. Christie, sent by the provincial board, here to observe and report. You put down your sheet. Will he come to this ward? Mrs. Pollock is at the linen cupboard with her back to you. I wouldn't know, she says, in the specific tone that means she knows. Which wards has he seen? A pause. Her hands continue moving through the folded linens. I wouldn't know exactly. You've gotten good at reading the texture of her silences. This one is the kind that contains. He's seen the front wards, the corridors that have been mopped 3 times since Monday, the ward with the recently pressed linens and the patients who've been reminded to dress their hair. You notice the mopping on Monday. You notice things. The corridor outside Ward 4 was mopped on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday morning before breakfast, which is 3 times in 3 days. The ward orderly, who usually nods to you in the corridor, has been moving fresh linens in quantity. Ward 4 is the one the superintendent takes visitors through. Agnes told you this. Agnes knows the geography of official attention the way a sailor knows currents from years of living at their mercy. He won't come to this ward, Agnes says. She hasn't looked up from her hemming. No, emotion in it. Just a fact about the world. And she's right, isn't she? Because Ward 7 is not the story the asylum wants to tell. Ward 7 is the chronic ward, the back ward. The ward where the beds are too close together and the stove doesn't reach the window beds and the oatmeal is the same 40 mornings running. The official visit takes a path from the front gate through the better-maintained spaces to the gardens, demonstrating the institution's efficacy, and then out through a different gate. The back wards are backstage. You know this. You've known it since week 3. But knowing something and sitting with a blunt needle in your hand while a government official drinks tea 2 buildings away and writes adequate conditions on his form, That's a different kind of knowing. That's the kind that sits in the chest in a particular way. Your hands have stopped moving. Agnes, without looking up, Mrs. Marsh, the sheets. You pick up the needle. You compose in your head the letter you would write to the inspector if you could write to him directly. Dear Dr. Christie, my name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 29 years old, and I have been held in Ward 7 of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum since July on the grounds of... And here you'd need to consult your records, because what the paperwork says and what actually happened are two different documents. You stop. This is the problem with the letter. You've been composing it since your first week, and the problem isn't the facts. You have the facts. You've been cataloguing them with the care of someone who used to write careful letters to newspapers, which is to say, methodically, with attention to evidence, with the understanding that what you assert must be defensible. The problem is that the letter exists within a system in which a woman who disagrees with her committal is not understood to be demonstrating her sanity. The disagreement is the symptom. You've thought about this at length. It has a particular dizzying quality, like looking over the edge of something that goes further down than you expected. You say, I should not be here. They say, that's what they all say. You say, but my committal was improperly obtained. They say, your husband signed the papers. A physician examined you. You say, the examination lasted 11 minutes. They say, you're agitated. You say, I am not agitated. I am... They say, Mrs. Marsh, the sheets. You pick up the needle, the thread through the cotton, the small, precise, irrelevant movement of a hand that used to write letters to newspapers, now folding and hemming and folding and hemming, while 2 buildings away a government official completes his boxes on a form that will not, under any circumstances, reach back here. You finish the sheet. You take up another. On a Thursday afternoon in November, 2 days after the inspector who didn't come to Ward 7, you're sitting on the end of your bed doing nothing when Harriet, who doesn't speak, who has not spoken to you or anyone in the 4 months you've been here, sits down beside you. She doesn't say anything. She just sits there, a few inches from you, on the edge of your bed, looking at her hands. You don't say anything either. You sit like that for perhaps 10 minutes. Her breathing is slow and regular. She smells like the ward, like everyone smells like the ward, but underneath it there's something very faintly floral, and you spend a moment trying to identify it before deciding it might just be whatever soap she was given at admission that's still faintly present in her hair. Her hands are smaller than yours, the nails cut short even, uniform. Someone has been careful with her nails. You look at this for a moment before you understand. She does them herself. She's careful about her own nails, that one thing maintained. She reaches out at some point and picks up the corner of your grey wool shawl. She rubs it between her thumb and index finger. Not strangely, just feeling the texture, assessing it, the way you might touch a fabric in a shop to determine its weight and quality. You stay very still. She lets go of the shawl corner, her hands go back to her lap, and then, quietly, so quietly you almost don't catch it, she says something. My mother had a shawl like this. The silence after it is careful, the way silence is careful when something fragile has been placed in it. What colour was your mother's, you ask, slowly, as though the question is made, of glass. A long pause, long enough that you think it's not going to be answered, and then, blue. A pause. It was blue. She wore it at the kitchen table in the evenings. That's all. She says nothing else. After a few more minutes, she gets up and goes back to the window. You stay on the edge of your bed for a long time after, feeling the grey wool between your fingers. Blue. Her mother's was blue. The image is so specific and so small. The whole of a life that existed before this room. The kitchen, the table, the evenings, the mother in the blue shawl, compressed into the texture of wool between a young woman's fingers. You can feel the weight of it. What was lost to arrive here? You fold your grey shawl more carefully when you put it away that night. You don't know precisely why this feels like something that needs doing. It does. In December, Florence Mackay dies. She arrived 3 weeks before Christmas in a state of severe agitation, and then became quiet, and then became very still, and then didn't wake up one morning. She was 67, listed as senile dementia, brought in by a nephew who lived on King Street, a grey-suited man you saw once, on the admission day, standing in the corridor while paperwork was completed, with the face of someone performing an obligation that he's relieved to be completing. Florence's bed is 2 down from yours. The death happens sometime before the morning bell, in the deep dark of the hours you can't see. You don't hear it. There's no sound. This is the thing about deaths in the back ward. Mrs. Pollock mentioned it once, not to comfort you, but simply as a fact about the work, in the tone of someone who has arranged their mind around a difficult reality and is describing the arrangement. Most of them are very quiet. You don't die loudly of what most of them have. The particular grinding down of the old and the malnourished and the profoundly unmoored is a slow process, and its end is usually silent. When you wake in the morning, the bed is empty. Mrs. Pollock came in before the bell. She does this on mornings when it's necessary. She comes in early to get the body out before the other women wake, which is a practical kindness, a small mercy that is also its own quiet revelation about how frequently it's necessary. At breakfast, nobody says anything. The bed is empty. That's the full notation. In the afternoon, 2 orderlies bring a new mattress. The old one is taken out. A new patient, older, with a particular look of the recently arrived, not yet oriented to the ward's rhythms, is in Florence's bed by supper. The bed is too needed for pausing. Agnes notices your face during supper. "When did you get here?" she says. Not unkindly. The question of someone assessing where you are in a trajectory she's watched many times. "July," she nods. "You asked Mrs. Pollock about correspondence your first week, I heard." "Yes." "Did you receive any?" "No." Agnes is quiet for a moment in the way she's quiet when she's deciding something. Then, "There was a woman here when I first arrived. She was in this building for 15 years. She died in the bed you're sleeping in now." You don't say anything. She used to say, "The days are hard, the nights are hard, but you are here. You're still here." A pause. "Is that comfort?" you ask. You mean it genuinely. Agnes considers it seriously, which is the only way Agnes considers anything. "I think it's the only thing that is sometimes," she says, "the being still here." In February, Dr. Hendricks comes to the ward for the monthly assessment. Dr. Hendricks is the ward physician. The consultations happen in a small room off the corridor, barely more than a closet really, with a desk and 2 chairs and a window looking into the inner courtyard, and take approximately 8 minutes each. You know the duration because you count the women who go in before you. Agnes. 8 minutes, Mrs. Connolly. 8 minutes, and then some, because of the shouting, which is Mrs. Connolly asking for Patrick under stress. Harriet, 4 minutes. She comes out with her face very still, her hands at her sides. For you. 12 minutes. The extra 4 are because of you. You've prepared for this consultation the way your father used to prepare his timepieces, each component given its proper attention, because the assembly matters. You tell Dr. Hendricks, I was admitted in July on the certification of my husband and one physician, examination lasting 11 minutes. I have no history of delusion, no history of violence, no history of self-harm. I have a documented history of writing letters to newspapers on public affairs matters, which I am prepared to argue does not constitute evidence of mental disorder under any reasonable interpretation of the relevant legislation. Dr. Hendricks is a thin man with spectacles and the air of someone who is professionally, structurally, constitutionally tired. He listens. He writes things down. He looks at you over his spectacles with an expression that might be assessment or might be something more careful than that. Your husband's certification indicates emotional instability, he says, mood irregularity, inability to manage domestic responsibilities. I managed my domestic responsibilities quite adequately, you say. I objected to the scope of what was considered domestic. Your certifying physician noted acute hysteria at time of admission. The certifying physician spent 11 minutes with me while my husband was in the room, you say. I was distressed. Anyone would be distressed under those circumstances. He looks at you, over the spectacles, a long moment. Then he writes something. I'll make a note, he says, indicating what? That you're to be moved to Ward 4 pending review. Something shifts in your chest. Not hope exactly. You've been careful about hope, treating it as a substance to be rationed carefully, because the wards contain women who spent all their hope and then had nothing left, but something adjacent to it, something with movement in it. Ward 4, you say. It's a recovery ward. The conditions are somewhat better, somewhat. When? When a bed becomes available. He closes the file. Mrs. Marsh, I should tell you, the review process involves your husband and the certifying physician and my own report. It's not, he pauses, it's not straightforward. Because my husband will object. He doesn't answer that directly. I'll make a note, he says again. And then, standing, ending the consultation in the way consultations end. 7 months is a long time to count days. It's what I have to count, you say. He nods once. He opens the door. The paper comes from the small attendance room off the corridor. You don't steal it. You ask. You ask Thomas, the young orderly from Parkdale, 17 years old, who's been nodding to you in the corridor for 4 months with an expression that you've gradually read as the expression of a person who is doing work they didn't fully understand when they took it, if he has a scrap of paper he doesn't need. He gives you 3 sheets, folded in quarters, and a pencil stub about 2 inches long. He doesn't ask what they're for. Maybe he knows. Maybe he doesn't want to know. Maybe he's 17, and from Parkdale, and the building has been making him quietly uncomfortable for months, and this is the small thing available to him. You put the paper and the pencil inside the waistband of your dress. Not a sophisticated hiding place. But Mrs. Pollock's searches, irregular, more frequent than monthly, less frequent than weekly, are thorough with surfaces and objects and not thorough with persons. She's looking for things that can cause harm. A pencil is 2 inches long. That night, after lamps out, you lie on the damp mattress in the dark with the pencil in your hand, not yet writing. Writing requires light, but the organisation of what you know, the precise inventory, the clockmaker's catalogue, can be done in the dark. Names, dates, facts. Agnes Fuller, born Edinburgh, 1833. Schoolteacher, arithmetic and composition. Admitted 1862. Listed as hysterical exhaustion following bereavement. Current status, full cognitive function, intact social reasoning, intact emotional regulation, intact practical intelligence. 11 years. Harriet. Last name unknown. Age approximately 22. Listed as melancholia with incoherence. Does not speak. Evidence of comprehension and emotional response clearly present. C. The wool shawl, the eyes that track, the nails kept even. The world she came from before this room. Florence Mackay. Admitted December 1873. Died before the morning bell. Bed needed by supper. Mrs. Connolly. The tremors. The name Patrick called through the dark. Margaret in the kitchen that she lives in still. Behind her eyes, describing the temperature the butter must be. You lie in the dark holding this pencil and arranging these women in the order of what needs to be said about them. When there's light, you'll write. On a Sunday in February, approximately 2 weeks before your move to Ward 4, a young orderly named Thomas makes a mistake. He's moving equipment through the wing, there's been a roof leak and the supplies are being relocated, and he opens the wrong door. He opens a door thinking it's the equipment storeroom. It isn't. It's the service staircase that goes up to the roof. He realizes his mistake immediately, begins to close the door. You're passing him in the corridor at exactly this moment, returning from the washroom. You stop. He looks at you. You look at the door. Thomas, who has been nodding to you for 4 months with the face of someone whose discomfort with this building has been accumulating quietly and needs somewhere to go. Thomas says nothing. He steps aside, holds the door slightly wider. You go through. The staircase is narrow and wooden and extremely cold. The smell of it is plaster and dust and unheated stone. Your hand on the wooden railing is already numb by the second landing. Your breath comes in clouds. 3 flights up. The steps are steep. Your thighs burning on the 3rd flight. The unaccustomed effort of actual stairs after months of a 40-foot room. There's a wooden hatch in the ceiling. A simple iron latch. You push it. It opens. You step out onto the roof of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, 999 Queen Street, West Toronto, Ontario, in February of 1874. The cold strikes you like a hand pressed flat against your face. Your eyes water immediately. The wind is from the north and it has travelled, you feel, a very long way to get here. But you don't care, because in front of you, in every direction, is the sky. You've not seen this much sky in 7 months. You've not seen a horizon. Ward 7's window faces the inner courtyard. Stone walls and grey sky in a rectangle. The world reduced to what can fit in 12 panes of glass. Now you can see everything. Queen Street below you, running east and west. The first floor windows and the shop signs and the bare winter trees in a line along the road. The horse-drawn streetcar moving along it, tiny at this height, the horses steaming in the cold. The rooftops spreading north and south in every direction. The irregular, broken line of chimneys, each exhaling its own column of grey smoke into the February morning. Hundreds of columns of smoke making the air above the city dense and particular and live. To the south, Lake Ontario, the lake. You can see the lake from here, the flat grey expanse of it, extending to where the horizon curves away and becomes something you can't quite see but can sense. The lake going on, going further, becoming eventually the St. Lawrence, becoming eventually the Atlantic, becoming eventually the whole rest of the world. Boats at anchor near the shoreline, dark small shapes. The city going on between you and the water, all of it present and moving. The city. It has been here the entire time. For 4 months, while you hemmed sheets in a 40-foot room, while you paced and counted and maintained the mechanism, this city has been out here, moving and working and living with the ordinary unconscious freedom of people who haven't lost it yet. Your eyes are streaming. The wind largely, somewhere down there on one of those streets, Jarvis Street, which you could locate from here if you can hold the grid in your mind, and you've always been good with maps, is the house where you lived for 6 years. The small library room with the shelves, the cracked spine prize books. Charles Marsh, presumably going about his days. He's not thinking about the roof. He's not thinking about Ward 7. He doesn't think about these things. You look at the lake. You look at the smoke. You look at the rooftops and the streets and the small moving figures of people going about their ordinary Tuesday morning with their hair staying up and their own clothing on their backs, and the complete unremarkable freedom of knowing they can leave wherever they are. You stand at the edge of the roof until your hands are so cold you've lost the sensation in your fingertips. The cold has moved up your arms and is working on your chest. Your face is red and wet from the wind and the water in your eyes. You stand there until standing there is no longer possible. Then you go back down. Thomas is still in the corridor, moving equipment. He doesn't look at you as you pass. "Thank you," you say quietly. He nods, keeps working. You go back to Ward 7. Agnes looks at you when you come in. Your face must show something, the cold in it, or something else. She looks at you for a moment and then looks away. "The roof?" she says. "The roof." She nods, unsurprised. "It's something," she says. "Yes," you say. "It is." March. The light comes earlier, not dramatically but measurably. The difference between January dark at 6 in the morning and March pale grey at 6 in the morning is a difference you register in your body before your eyes. Something in the chest that knows daylight is coming before daylight actually comes. You write in the early mornings, 20 minutes, sometimes 30. Before the bell, lying on your side with the paper flat against the bed slats, because sitting up wakes Mrs. Connolly, who is beside you and who sleeps badly. The pencil is very short now. You've learned to write smaller than you normally write, letters pressed close together, using every inch of the 3 sheets with the care of someone who knows there's no more paper coming. The pencil is almost gone. You tilt it to use the remaining edge. What you've written, 18 names, 18 dates of admission, reconstructed as precisely as possible, 18 listed diagnoses, 18 brief observations, not diagnoses, you're careful about this, you're not a physician, but descriptions of what you have actually seen in 4 months of close observation. Agnes Fuller, arithmetic teacher, adequate cognition, adequate emotional regulation, adequate practical intelligence, 11 years. You've reread that line about Agnes several times. It says what it says. Harriet, the blue shawl, the nails kept even, the world she came from. Florence Mackay, gone before breakfast, bed needed by supper, the 8-minute consultations, the single stove, the blunt needle and its calloused results, the oatmeal without bread 5 days in 7. You've also written, carefully, in the last available space on the 3rd sheet, the following. The women who are incorrectly placed here become, over time, difficult to distinguish from the women who are correctly placed here. The institution produces its own evidence. This is the mechanism. This is what requires examination. You fold the 3 sheets and put them back in the waistband of your dress. The pencil is done. It's done its work. On a Tuesday in March, Mrs. Pollock comes to the ward at an unusual time and tells you to bring your things. Ward 4, she says, bed's open. You stand up from the hemming table. You have the grey wool shawl, 1 spare dress, 2 pairs of darned stockings, 3 sheets of paper covered. You look at Agnes. Agnes has not looked up from her hemming. After a moment she does look up, and she looks at you with a quiet face that gives very little away. Good, she says. 1 word. Agnes. Go. Not unkindly. You want to say more. The feeling of standing in a doorway with too much compressed into a moment that won't hold it. I'll write everything down, you say. I'll write the names. She looks at you for a long moment. Then, very slight, barely a shift, but present, the ghost of something that wants something. My name is Agnes Fuller, she says. I was born in Edinburgh in 1833. I was a school teacher. I taught arithmetic and composition at the Methodist School on Baldwin Street for 9 years. A pause. Write that down, she says, if you write things. I will, you say. You follow Mrs. Pollock out the door. Ward 4 smells different. Not dramatically. Not roses, not a parlour. Still carbolic and wool, and the institutional smell that belongs to all institutions. But the floors have been mopped more recently. The walls are whitewashed brighter. The window faces Queen Street. You can see the street through the bars, the movement on it. People go in places. There are curtains at 2 beds near the far wall. Plain cotton curtains, nothing elaborate, but curtains. You sit on the edge of your new bed, 4th from the left, 1st row, and look at the curtains for a while. The review is on a Monday morning in May. A small office on the ground floor with a window facing the front garden. The roses have been pruned and are showing their first small leaf growth. A gardener is working the beds. Charles Marsh is already seated when you're brought in. You haven't seen him since July. 10 months. He looks the same. Slightly more settled, perhaps. The air of someone who has managed an awkward situation and is now merely waiting for the administrative completion of it. He looks at you when you come in, assessing, measuring whatever you look like against whatever he expected you to look like. You look at him. You've spent 10 months in Ward 7 and Ward 4 of the Provincial Lunatic Asylum. You've hemmed approximately 800 sheets. You've paced a 40-foot room a number of times you've stopped calculating because the number exceeds the room's ability to mean anything. You've watched Florence Mackay be here and then not be here before breakfast. You've watched Agnes Fuller continue the extraordinary project of 11 years of being still here. You have 3 sheets of paper inside your dress. You sit across from your husband and you are completely calm. Not the performed calm of Ward 4's recovery assessment. A different kind. The calm of someone who has spent 10 months learning what they're made of and has arrived through that process at a kind of bedrock understanding that doesn't require performance. Mrs. Marsh, Dr. Andrews begins. My name is Eleanor Haigh, you say. Eleanor Marsh was the name given to me by the man across the table. In this context, I'd prefer my own. Silence. Dr. Hendricks writes something. Charles's expression closes. The purpose of today's review? Dr. Andrews says. I know the purpose, you say, still calm, the mechanism running. I'd like to present documentation and testimony, if you'll permit me. You may proceed, says Dr. Andrews. You proceed. Here is what Eleanor Haigh tells them on a Monday morning in May 1874, while a gardener works the rose beds and the city moves on Queen Street. She tells them about the 11-minute examination. The certification signed by a physician who addressed 2 of his 3 questions to her husband. She tells them about Ward 7. She describes it specifically, with the precision of someone who spent 4 months counting and cataloguing with the care her father taught her. The oatmeal, the blunt needle, the 40-foot room, the 8 minutes monthly, the 1 window, the stove that reaches the middle beds. Florence Mackay. The bed needed by supper. She tells them about Agnes Fuller, the arithmetic teacher, the 11 years, the 5-year period since a listed diagnosis was last reviewed by anyone with the authority to review it. She places 3 sheets of paper on the table. Dr. Andrews picks them up. He reads. His expression, as he reads, does something complicated. Charles says, "Eleanor, I'm speaking," you say. The room is very quiet. Outside, the gardener straightens and looks at something beyond the fence, something in the middle distance. He's thinking about something. Then he bends back down to the roses. The whole city is out there doing that, tending to things, thinking about things, living, and the room contains 3 sheets of paper covered in small writing and a system deciding what to do with the woman who wrote them. They release you on a morning in June. The process is anticlimactic in the specifically bureaucratic way of processes that have been resisted at every prior stage. Forms, summaries, a statement from Dr. Andrews that the original certification was obtained on insufficient grounds, a notification to Charles Marsh, who does not contest it. Perhaps he consulted a lawyer about the 3 sheets of paper. You walk out the front door of the provincial lunatic asylum on a June morning and stop on the front steps. The warmth of a June morning on your face and the backs of your hands. You had described warmth to yourself all winter, the texture of it, your father's workshop in autumn, a kitchen with the stove going. But the description and the thing are different. The thing is entirely specific. This particular temperature on this particular skin on this particular morning. You stand on the steps. Queen Street is busy. Horses and carts and the streetcar and pedestrians going places with the ordinary certainty of people who know they can go places. Nobody's looking at you. You're just a woman on the steps of a building in Toronto on a June morning. Nobody knows what's behind you. Agnes Fuller is behind you, still inside, still in Ward 7. Her name on 3 sheets of paper which are, as of today, in the possession of Dr. Andrews and will be, you've made sure of this, forwarded to the provincial board as part of the review record. It's not enough. You know it's not enough. The 3 sheets of paper are the beginning of something, not the end of it. There are more letters to write. To your father in Hamilton, to the Globe, to the Board of Inspectors, to every mechanism of accountability available to a woman without a husband, willing to act as her legal representative, which is to say, not many mechanisms, but not none. Not none. You breathe in the June air. It smells like the city. Horses and coal smoke and the particular summer smell of Toronto. The lake behind everything. The particular freshness that comes off Lake Ontario in early summer, before the summer heat closes it off. You breathe it in, all of it. Then you walk down the steps. But here is where I want to take you for a moment. Before the night is over, before the June morning and the steps and the walk into the city, before the letters and the board and the small machinery of accountability beginning its slow work. I want to take you back to the last night on Ward 4, the night before the hearing. You're in your bed and the curtains are slightly drawn and the window faces Queen Street, and through the bars of it you can see the last light of a May evening, that particular colour, somewhere between blue and not blue, that exists for 15 minutes at the end of a spring day before the dark takes it. Tomorrow you'll be sitting across from Charles Marsh and 3 sheets of paper. You're not afraid. You've turned the mechanism over and over in the long days, and you've prepared as well as you can prepare, and what remains when the preparation is done is something solid. What you feel tonight is something stranger. You feel the weight of everyone else's tonight. Agnes is 2 buildings away, on the same damp mattress under the same thin blanket. Tonight is not different from any of Agnes's other nights in 11 years, except in the way that all nights are different. The specific weighting of the dark, the particular quality of the silence, the cold or its absence. Harriet is in there too. Harriet with the nails kept even, and the face at the window and the blue shawl that was her mother's, that she still feels the ghost of in any grey wool she happens to touch. Mrs. Connolly calling for Patrick through the dark. Margaret and the butter at the right temperature, and the crust that you press into the tin with the specific gesture of hands that know their work. Florence Mackay, gone before breakfast. All the names on the 3 sheets of paper. You breathe in, you breathe out. The last of the not blue fades from the sky above Queen Street. The sounds around you are settling. The building at night has its own register of sounds. The boiler's low rumble, the distant bell, the settling of old stone, the particular creak of the Ward 4 floor when someone shifts in their bed. Mrs. Pollock's footsteps on the corridor, regular. The sound of the institution maintaining itself through the night. These sounds have become familiar. More familiar than you wanted them to become. But there it is. Familiarity happens to you whether you consent to it or not. The body adapts. The ears adapt. The sound of Ward 4 at 10 o'clock at night is by now a sound you know. You know which creak is the 3rd floorboard from the door. You know the particular pitch of the bell at 11 versus midnight. You know the sound Mrs. Connolly makes when she's dreaming versus when she's calling for Patrick. And you know, by now, how long the calling lasts before it subsides on its own. These are not the things you expected to know when you were Eleanor Haigh in her father's workshop in Hamilton, or Eleanor Marsh in the library room on Jarvis Street with the prize books and the newspaper volumes. But they are the things you know. The pump has been working. The water has been moving. You are, against every expectation, including your own, still here. The night deepens. Somewhere outside, Toronto's doing what it does. The tavern still lit. The lake doing its flat grey patient thing in the dark, the horses in the livery stables shifting their weight, the night watchmen walking their rounds along streets that smell different at midnight than they do at noon. All of it continuing, with or without witnesses. This is what you've learned in 10 months that you didn't know before. The city continues regardless of whether you're watching it. The world goes on maintaining itself, the ordinary commerce of it, the ordinary living, and the back wards exist alongside that, and the back wards are invisible to that, and the invisibility is not an accident, but a design. Not a design anyone drew with intention, a design that emerges from the accumulation of small decisions, about which corridors get mopped before inspections, about which wards the official visitors walk through, about what fits in an 8-minute consultation and what gets left out. A design made of omissions. You know this now. You've mapped it. 3 sheets of paper covered in small writing. Agnes Fuller's name on page 2, line 4. Let the thoughts slow. This is where the mind goes in the last minutes before sleep. Images rather than sentences, sensations rather than arguments. Not the argument you've been preparing, not the careful assembly of evidence, just the sound of many clocks ticking at different rates, the smell of machine oil and brass shavings, the particular weight of a grey wool shawl in winter, a view from a roof, the lake, the smoke, the rooftops, the extraordinary, ordinary fact of the world continuing out there. Agnes at the window, Agnes who is still here, centuries will pass. The building at 999 Queen Street West will stand through everything the 20th century brings. The neighbourhood will change around it. The function will change. The understanding of what it contained, who it contained, and why, and by what mechanisms, will change slowly, imperfectly, in the way that understanding changes when it's also an admission. They'll rename it the Queen Street Mental Health Centre in 1976. They'll repurpose most of it. They'll renovate the front wards and reroute the corridors and plant better roses in the front garden. But the building is still there, and somewhere in the record, in the provincial board reports of the 1890s, in the subsequent investigations, in the slow machinery of accountability that was set in motion partly by a woman with a blunt needle and 3 sheets of paper, Agnes Fuller's name appears. The school teacher from Edinburgh, the arithmetic and composition teacher, admitted 1862, held for 11 years on the basis of an assessment that a later board characterised as having insufficient grounds for continued committal. She was released in 1876, 14 years. She was 43. I don't know what she did after. The record doesn't follow her further. She went somewhere, back to Edinburgh perhaps, or somewhere else entirely, somewhere she could hear clocks ticking and smell something other than carbolic acid in the morning, somewhere she could look out a window that wasn't barred. I hope she found it. Let the breath slow. Whatever the day held, whatever you carried today, whatever required managing, whatever was hard in the specific way that your days are hard, you can put it down now. The sheets are hemmed. That's someone else's work, someone else's hands, the calloused thumbs of women in a 40-foot room who did their days in a building the city didn't tell you about. They did the work. They kept the water moving. Some of them found a way out. Some of them stayed. All of them were real. You're not in that room. You're wherever you are, with whatever comfort you have, and the distance between you and that room is significant, and that distance deserves to be felt. The sounds around you are becoming background rather than foreground. The particular late-night signature of wherever you are, the sounds your house makes, your building makes, the sounds that mean night and rest and the day is over now. Those sounds are settling into the rhythm of something that doesn't need your attention. Your body is heavier than it was 20 minutes ago. This is normal. This is the body doing what bodies are extraordinarily good at doing when you let them, releasing the day, loosening the muscles that have been working, letting the breath find its own rate, which is slower, the exhale longer than the inhale, the chest rising less and falling more, the whole system beginning its slow, nightly migration toward rest. Let it happen. The thing Eleanor Haigh carried with her out of that building, down those front steps into the June morning, it wasn't only the 3 sheets of paper, it was the knowledge, purchased at a specific price, of what the ordinary machinery of a life looks like when the ordinary protections of a life are removed. The oatmeal without bread, the needle without sharpness, the 8 minutes that are supposed to be a consultation, the way a person is still entirely themselves under everything that's been put over them, hemming sheets with a clockmaker's precision, pacing the 40 feet with the mind going somewhere else, building in secret the architecture of what needs to be said. You are still yourself, under everything. This is the thing that doesn't change. The human stubbornness of it. The water that keeps moving because some part of you insists on working the pump. Still here. Let the images soften. Let the 40-foot room go. Let the blunt needle go. Let the November cold and the May hearing and the walk down the front steps. Let it all settle into the past tense, where it belongs, where it can be examined from a distance rather than survive from the inside. You've done your surviving for today. Right now there's only this, the breath and the dark and the weight of your body grateful to be horizontal, to be done, to be warm enough. The window of wherever you are probably has no bars on it. That's more than Agnes had for 14 years. That's more than enough. December arrives the way winter arrives in Toronto, not gradually but through a door. One day it is November, grey and manageable and damp. The next morning you wake and the air in the ward has a different density, sharper, more present. The breath of 18 women rises to the ceiling in separate visible clouds, which you can see even in the dark before the lamp comes. Your feet hang off the edge of the mattress for 1 second before they touch the floor. In that second you know, the floor is different under your feet today. Not just cold, something more fundamental. The density of the wood has changed. You feel it through the calluses on your heels, through the skin that has been bare on these boards enough mornings to begin reading their small gradations. You reach and touch the wall beside the bed. The stone will be ice. It is always cold, but in December the cold of the wall has a different character. Not merely the absence of warmth, but the active presence of something opposite to warmth, something that wants to come inside and will stay there until April. You move your hand away from the wall. Outside, through the 12 panes that face the inner courtyard, the sky is grey with a lighter grey in the east, the first suggestion of dawn, which in December arrives late and leaves early, giving you the shortest span of daylight and the longest stretch of dark. You have been here since July. You've watched the days shorten. You've watched the rectangle of the window change what it shows. First leaves on the courtyard branches, then bare branches, then frost on bare branches, then simply greyness. The rectangle is showing you snow, not falling, already fallen. It came down in the night while you slept, without your knowledge, without consulting your schedule. It lies in a thin layer on the narrow stone ledge on the other side of the glass, and on the pitched roof of the outbuilding across the courtyard, and on the branches of the courtyard trees, turning each branch into something twice its own width, something drawn in white on top of itself. You look at it longer than necessary. Snow. Snow in the courtyard of the provincial lunatic asylum, Queen Street West, in December of 1873. It doesn't know where it is. It doesn't care that it's come down inside walls rather than outside them. It just lies there doing its one thing, which is this: making the world look cleaner. That isn't accurate. You know this. Snow doesn't make anything cleaner. It only covers what was there. Under it, the courtyard is the same as yesterday. The cobbles that never wash quite clean. The autumn leaves in the corners that weren't raked thoroughly enough. Snow is a surface, not a change. And yet you look at it, and something in your chest makes a movement you might call relief, if relief were the right word. Perhaps the right word is interval, a visual interval in the unbroken greyness, evidence that something is happening outside. Winter changes the ward, not physically. The walls are the same walls, the beds are the same beds, the distance between your bed and Mrs. Connolly's is the same distance it has always been, which you measured in the first week using the width of your hand and arrived at 7 inches, and 7 inches is what it remains. The same stove at the far end that heats the middle beds and leaves the window beds to their own arrangements. The same 12 panes, the same oatmeal. But winter changes the light, and the light changes everything. In July when you arrived, the ward had long light. Not pleasant light, institutional light filtered through dirty glass, not particularly warm, but long light. Light that lasted through the afternoon, and gave you something to work toward and work away from. Morning, noon, afternoon, evening. 4 legible sections of the day, each with its own character, each a marker of time passing. In December, the light is compressed into a narrow band between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. 6 hours. 6 hours of grey daylight, and then it fades, and the ward operates on lamplight. A lamp at each end of the room, oil lamps that produce a yellowish, inadequate glow that makes every face look slightly wrong, slightly altered from what faces look like in proper light. Every face in lamplight looks like a version of itself that's been slightly mistranslated. At 3 in the afternoon, the lamp is lit. You're hemming sheets. You've been hemming sheets since 8. You'll hem sheets until noon. In the afternoon, there's sometimes what Mrs. Pollock calls free time, which means unstructured time in the ward, during which you may sit or pace or look at the window or do whatever it is that 18 women in a 40-foot room do with unstructured time. What Agnes does is knit. She has needles and wool. She asked for them apparently in her second year, and received them, and had been knitting since 1864. She is extraordinarily good at it now, the needles moving with the automatic speed of something that has been internalised past the level of conscious skill. She doesn't look at her hands. She can carry on a full conversation, not that she has many, without her hands slowing at all. She makes scarves mostly. She doesn't know what becomes of them. What Harriet does is sit at the window. What you do in the weeks before the hearing is compose. You walk the 40 feet of the room, back and forth, and in your head you write and rewrite and revise. The letter to the board, the letter to the newspaper, the record of names and dates and facts that constitutes the 3 sheets of paper. Mrs. Pollock watches you pace sometimes. From her chair near the door, doing her own knitting, not the careful meditative knitting of Agnes, but the knitting of someone doing a thing while also doing several other things. She watches you walk the length of the room and back, and does not intervene. This is something you noted early. She doesn't intervene in the pacing. Some attendants you've gathered from Agnes discourage it. There's a theory, which has filtered down in institutional fragments to Ward 7, that repetitive movement is a symptom, that pacing and rocking and the other self-soothing motions of confined people represent the kind of behaviour that belongs in a patient's file under evidence of continuing instability. Mrs. Pollock apparently has decided otherwise, or has decided that the containment of pacing requires more effort than the pacing itself causes trouble, which amounts to the same practical outcome from a different philosophical position. You pace, you write in your head, you compile. By the first week of December you've developed a system. It requires the grey wool shawl, the spare dress worn as an undergarment over the regular dress. You figured this out in November. that wearing 2 dresses at once provides insulation sufficient to extend the range of the stove's warmth about 2 additional beds, and a specific relationship with the chamber pot. The chamber pot matters more in winter, because winter means not wanting to put bare feet on cold stone any more than twice per night, which means calibrating your liquid intake after 6 in the evening with the same precision you bring to everything else. Not so little that you're uncomfortable, enough to need it only once at a time you can predict. This is not a graceful calculation, but grace is a consideration for people who have more immediate options. Your hands are the worst of it. The sewing work keeps them moving through the morning, which keeps the circulation in them, which means by noon they're approximately functional. But the cold has gotten into the skin in a way that 4 months has made permanent, a persistent low level of rawness at the knuckles, the skin tight and slightly shiny over the joints of your fingers, the cracks at the base of your index fingernails that bleed if you open your hands too quickly in the morning. You've learned to open your hands slowly. You've learned more broadly to do everything that involves your hands slowly, at least until midday. The needle through the cotton in the morning requires more deliberateness than the needle through the cotton in the afternoon, because the morning fingers are stiff, and the thread keeps catching wrong. You've watched other women handle this differently. Mrs. Pollock brings a small basin of warm water in winter mornings and lets the women hold their hands over the steam before the sewing starts, which is a kindness that sits alongside other non-kindnesses in the particular complicated way that Mrs. Pollock's relationship to this work sits alongside itself. You hold your hands over the basin for 30 seconds. It helps for about 20 minutes. Then the cold comes back. You keep sewing. There's an evening in December, a Wednesday, which means bread at supper, and the bread is slightly less stale than usual, and this combination of small improvements produces in the ward a quality that approaches, without quite reaching, ease, when Agnes sits on the end of your bed and talks. Agnes doesn't talk often. When she does, you've learned to stop whatever you're doing and listen, because Agnes doesn't talk for the sake of talking. Agnes talks when she has something to give you that she's decided you need. There are 3 kinds of people in this building, she says. She's still knitting. The needles don't slow. The first kind came because something happened to their minds. Something real. Something that needs care. A pause. Some of them are in this ward. Some are in worse wards. Some, the ones who respond to whatever care is available, are in the better wards, working through it. The needles click. The second kind came because something happened to their circumstances. Poverty. No one to care for them. Illness of the body rather than the mind misread. Old age without family. Drink. She glances toward Mrs. Connolly's bed across the room. Sometimes drink and real illness together, which is its own kind of complicated. You listen. The third kind is a smaller group, or perhaps not smaller. Perhaps it's difficult to know. The third kind came because someone needed them to be here. The needles, wives, daughters, women who inherit money, or refuse to give it up, or spend it in ways their husbands don't approve of. Women who argue in public. Women who are angry in ways that inconvenience men with pens and forms. A pause. I'm not telling you something you don't know. No, you say. The problem, Agnes says, is that the 3 kinds become harder to distinguish over time. This is the mechanism. She uses your word, mechanism, and you notice it. You put someone in a room for long enough, with insufficient food, with no occupation that uses what their mind actually does, with no regular contact with anyone from outside, with no sunlight to speak of and no information about what's happening in the world they came from. And the mind begins to change, not quickly, but it changes. She stops knitting. An unprecedented event. She looks at you directly. I was not what they said I was when I arrived, she says. I was grieving and I was exhausted and I was a woman who lived alone and had no one to speak for me. I was not what they said. I know, you say, but there are things I can no longer do that I could do when I arrived. Even precise, the tone of someone reporting an experiment. I could play the piano. I was proficient, not remarkable, but proficient. I cannot now. The coordination is gone. I could calculate in my head to 4 5-decimal places. I was an arithmetic teacher. It was my work. It was what I did every day. I can still calculate, but the 4th and 5th decimal places have become unreliable. Sometimes they're simply not there when I reach for them. She picks up her knitting again. 11 years, she says. That is the cost. That is what is on the other side of the ledger that the annual reports don't contain. You are very still. The room is making its usual sounds around you. Mrs. Connolly's irregular breathing, the creak of Harriet's chair by the window, the rumble of the boiler somewhere below. December settling into the stones. The 4th decimal place, you say, and the 5th. She doesn't say it with self-pity. She says it the way she says everything, as a fact requiring accurate accounting. Write that down too, if you're writing things. The night attendant on Ward 7 is named Mr. Farrow. This is unusual, a male attendant on the women's ward at night, and was explained to you early on by Agnes in the tone she uses when explaining things the institution has no intention of re-examining. There aren't enough female attendants for the overnight shifts. There haven't been since the patient numbers expanded. Mr. Farrow is responsible for the corridor outside Ward 7 and 2 adjacent wards, and he checks each ward at approximately 11, at 2, and at 4:30. Mr. Farrow is perhaps 50. He has the face of a man who has been working night shifts for a long time. A particular quality of pallor, of the eyes being perpetually slightly unfocused, the body locked into a cycle that runs opposite to daylight, and that has been running opposite to daylight long enough that the body has accepted it as normal, and simply looks this way now. He is not unkind. He is not particularly kind. He does his checks. He marks his register. He responds to acute situations by summoning the night supervisor. He is a presence, which is different from a person in the way that a clock on the wall is a presence. You register it. It marks time. It does not require engagement, except once in December. You're awake at 2 o'clock, not a night you sleep well. There aren't many of those. When you hear the key in the lock and the door opens at 6 inches, and the lamplight from the corridor makes a thin, bright stripe across the floor of the ward. He looks in. The usual check. You watch the stripe of light. Then, before the door closes, you hear something you haven't heard in here before. Humming. Mr. Farrow is humming something to himself, very quietly. The tuneless semi-absent sound of a person who's very tired and occupying the tired mind with whatever is available. 4 bars of something, losing its shape, becoming something else, settling briefly into a recognizable fragment of what you think might be a hymn, then losing its shape again. Just a tired man in a dark corridor at 2 o'clock in the morning humming. The door closes. The stripe of light disappears. You lie in the dark with that sound for a long time after. It's the most ordinary thing you've heard in 4 months. The most unconsciously ordinary. A man humming without knowing he's humming, not for anyone's benefit, not communicating anything, not performing. Just the overflow of a tired human mind through the nearest available channel. You're surprised by how much it matters, not for sentimental reasons, for a different reason, a reason that takes you a while to articulate. Lying there in the cold dark while December presses on the window. It's the first sound you've heard in 4 months that had nothing to do with this place. It arrived from outside, from whoever Mr. Farrow was before he was a night attendant walking a corridor, from whatever church he attended, or his mother hummed in a kitchen, or he heard on a street in the city before he came to work here. The hymn or the fragment of a hymn carried something with it from there to here. From the ordinary outside world into Ward 7 at 2 o'clock in the morning. The ordinary world pressing through. You note it down in the catalogue you're building in your head. Evidence that the outside world is still there and still sending signals, whether it knows it or not. In the 3rd week of December, Dr. Hendricks comes for what he announces, without explanation, as an additional assessment. This is unusual. The consultations are monthly, and you had your monthly in the 1st week. An additional assessment means something has changed in the administrative structure around you, and the something is either good or bad, and there's no way to know which without the meeting itself. You've had months of practice sitting with that particular variety of not knowing. Your relationship to it has changed. In August you sat with it the way you'd sit on a ledge above a drop. Tense, monitoring, needing to know where the edge was at every moment. Now you sit with it the way Agnes sits with it, as weather. Present to be noted, not to be argued with. The small room off the corridor, 2 chairs, the desk, the window onto the front garden, bare now, December. Bare, the ground hard with frost. Dr. Hendricks is more direct today. He sits with his file open on the desk but doesn't look at it, which is its own kind of signal. Your husband has engaged a solicitor, he says. You process this. Opposing the review? Preemptively, yes. He pauses. It's not unusual. When patients in cases like yours, where the certification grounds are being re-examined, families sometimes seek to reinforce the legal basis before the re-examination reaches any conclusion. Yes. You look at the frost on the garden. Dr. Hendricks, is this a courtesy visit, or is there something you need from me? He has the look of a man who is working within a system he did not design, and does not fully endorse and does not know how to exit, which is a face you've gotten good at reading. It's a common face in this building. I need you to understand that the review will take longer than I initially indicated. Longer. The word. How much longer? These things, the involvement of solicitors, the provincial board schedule, the necessity of additional certifying opinions. He stops, starts again. Spring, at the earliest. Spring. It is December. Your hands are in your lap. You look at them for a moment. The cracked knuckles, the callus on the index finger. The hands of someone who has been here long enough to be physically changed by the being here. I see, you say. I want you to know that my note stands. My recommendation stands. What I wrote in your file after our last consultation, it stands. Does it? Yes. He says it with a firmness that seems to cost him something. What I observe in you, Mrs. Marsh, is not what the original certification describes. I want you to know that I observe the difference. You look at him. You think about Agnes, in the room 2 doors down, with her knitting needles and her absent 4th decimal place. There are 17 other women on this ward, you say quietly. He's quiet for a moment. I know that. Do any of their files contain recommendations from you? The pause is long enough to be its own answer. I'm one physician, he says, in one institution, with a caseload of... I'm not accusing you, you say. I'm noting it, for the record that I am keeping in my head, which will eventually become paper, which will eventually reach the provincial board whether my review succeeds or not. He looks at you. Spring, you say. Then spring. You stand, indicating the consultation is over, which is not your prerogative. These things end when the physician ends them, that's the protocol. And he doesn't correct you. He stands too. I'll note your composure, he says, almost with irony, almost. Please do, you say. Thomas appears in the corridor on a Thursday afternoon in late December, with the expression he has when he's decided something. You know this expression by now. It precedes his small acts of informal humanity. The wrong door held slightly wider, the occasional piece of information about something happening in the rest of the building, the scrap of newspaper that appeared on your bed one morning in November with no explanation, which you read so many times the ink came off on your fingers. Today he has 2 sheets of paper folded in quarters and a pencil that is a full 4 inches long. He doesn't hand them to you directly. He sets them on the windowsill in the corridor, nearest the door towards 7, and then picks up something from the floor and examines it with great apparent interest as you pass. 2 sheets of paper, a pencil 4 inches long. Christmas, perhaps, in the only form available to him on a 17-year-old orderly's salary in this building. You pick them up off the windowsill. You don't say thank you out loud. That would require acknowledging that a transaction has occurred in a corridor where transactions of this kind are not supposed to occur. You glance at him, and he has the expression of someone examining a very interesting floor, and you take the paper and the pencil into Ward 7. Agnes, across the room, sees you come in. She takes one look at your face and one look at your hands, and she picks up her knitting and resumes, and the ward continues as though nothing happened. That night after the lamp goes out, you don't try to write in the dark. You hold the paper. The specific weight of 2 sheets of paper in your hand, the slight grain of them against your fingertips, clean paper, blank paper, the particular potential of it, the thing it's willing to become, given ink and pressure and intention. Your father gave you paper when you were small, not as a special gift, as working material, the way he gave you tools. Here is the thing you use for the work. You make from it what the work requires. You fall asleep holding the paper, and you dream of nothing you can remember. On Christmas Day, which is a Thursday, the institution provides a dinner. This is an annual event. Agnes describes it without sentiment, as someone describing a feature of a landscape they've mapped many times. There will be roast meat, she says. There will be potatoes. There have been years with a kind of pudding. The pudding is inconsistent. Last year, Mrs. Pollock brought in a ribbon she bought with her own money and tied it to the lamp. On Christmas morning, Mrs. Pollock ties the ribbon to the lamp. It's red, about 8 inches long, tied in a bow that lists slightly to one side because she did it herself without a mirror. It catches the lamplight and throws a faint warm colour across the ceiling above the lamp. A small and impractical thing that performs no function in the world except this. It marks the day as different. Mrs. Connolly, looking at it. Oh, with a face that was briefly a much younger face. Briefly the face of a woman who tied ribbons to things because it was the season for it. because the house wanted decorating, because this was what you did on this day. Then it was Mrs. Connolly's face again. She looked away. The dinner comes at midday. You're not prepared for how the smell affects you. The smell arrives in the dining room before the food does. A wave of it, roasting meat and something underneath it that your nose identifies as onion before you can consciously recognize what's happening. And something in your body responds before your mind has time to form a considered position on it. Your mouth fills with saliva. Your hands grip the edge of the dining table. You eat differently on Wednesdays and Saturdays when the bread comes. Your body knows what bread days are. There is a small anticipatory uptick in the morning that you've become aware of and track with mild interest, the way you track any reliable mechanism. The body's memory of what it needs is more honest than the mind's pretenses about having adapted. But the smell of roasting meat is something else. The smell of roasting meat is not just hunger. It's the map of every meal that had it. Your father's table in Hamilton with the good Sunday dinner, the kitchen in the Jarvis Street house with the smell rising from the range on winter evenings, every ordinary version of this exact smell in every room that had it. You sit very still and breathe it in and don't talk. Margaret across from you has her eyes closed. Her hands are flat on the table. Her face is fully concentrated, the way it concentrates when she describes cooking. She is somewhere else entirely. She is in whatever kitchen this smell belongs to. Hers probably the kitchen where she worked before, where she knew the exact temperature of the butter and the precise moment the sauce changed and the weight of pastry under the thumb. You watch her and don't speak. This is what Margaret has. This is the room she can go to when everything else is this room. The kitchen that exists only behind her eyes now, but exists completely, in full sensory detail, every smell and texture and temperature accurate. The food arrives, roast beef, potatoes, a thick gravy, salted properly, which is not a small thing. The regular food is undersalted because salt costs money, and you've been eating undersalted food for 5 months, and the first taste of properly salted gravy does something to the back of your jaw that is immediate and involuntary. Margaret opens her eyes. She looks at the plate. She picks up her fork with the precise, respectful economy of someone who knows exactly what this is. You eat. After, in the ward, with a ribbon still tied to the lamp and the day gone quiet, Margaret sits beside you. She doesn't sit beside you often. She keeps to herself, mostly, not coldly, just as a woman who has worked out the minimum social footprint that lets her maintain what she needs to maintain. The gravy was wrong, she says. It was better than usual. The salt was right, she folds her hands in her lap. But they used drippings from yesterday's joint, you could taste it. Good gravy uses fresh drippings, and they didn't let it reduce long enough. It was thin. You look at her. It was the best meal I've had in 5 months, you say. That isn't the same as it being a good meal, she pauses, not unkindly. A thing can be the best available version of itself and still be wrong. A brief silence. I'm not ungrateful. I'm just accurate. You're accurate, you agree. She nods. She looks at the lamp, at the red ribbon listing to the left. I used to cook Christmas dinner for 16 people, she says, every year for 7 years, starting at 4 in the morning. Everything made from the beginning, the stock, the pastry, everything. A pause. I was good at it. I know you were, you say. She looks at you, assessing whether you mean this or are being kind, which is a distinction she makes sharply. Whatever she finds in your face, she nods. 3 years, she says. 3 years I've been in here and I haven't touched a kitchen. She opens her hands and looks at them. I dream about it. Is that strange? No, you say. I dream about the butter. Specifically the butter. The weight of it in a warm bowl. The way it gives when you press into it. The sound it makes when it starts to melt in the pan. She closes her hands again. I don't dream about the man who came in drunk every Tuesday night or the bruises from it. I dream about the butter. You sit with that for a moment. When you get out, you say, what will you do first? She looks at you. Cook, she says. Just that. And then? Cook again. The ghost of something that isn't quite a smile but shares a wall with one. And if they let me after that, cook again. The lamp burns. The ribbon catches the light. Outside, Queen Street is doing its Christmas Thursday business. Quieter than usual, the city temporarily in some approximation of rest. And somewhere out there, in kitchens that are not this kitchen, women who are not these women are cooking the meals of the day, with proper drippings reduced long enough and fresh bread and blackberry jam on the second shelf of the cupboard. And in here, Margaret is remembering the weight of butter in a warm bowl, and this is what she has, and she is holding it with both hands precisely. You start counting things, not just the days. You've been counting days since week 3. More precise things now. As December deepens and the hours of light contract to 6 and the ward closes in with the quality of a space that is trying to become smaller than it already is, you find that precision is the thing that keeps the mechanism running. You count because counting is a form of contact with reality, a refusal to let the texture of things go soft and approximate. You count the panes of the window, 12. You count the beds, 18 in this ward, 11 in Ward 4, which you've seen once from the corridor. You count the number of times Mrs. Pollock uses the word fine in a week, Monday through Sunday, as a response to questions she'd rather not answer directly. The number this week is 17. You count the steps from your bed to the door. 14 if you step normally. 11 if you lengthen your stride. You've experimented with what it means to be a person who takes 11 steps to the door instead of 14. And the finding is nothing, which is itself a finding. The room is the same room at any stride length. You count the threads in the sheet you're hemming on a Tuesday in the second week of December. You count them as a test, as a way of taking a reading, the way you'd read a gauge. The thread count is the same as the sheet 2 days ago. Not high, coarse cotton, institutional grade. The fabric that lasts rather than the fabric that feels like anything. And this consistency is either reassuring or depressing, and you've stopped trying to determine which. You count the minutes of the monthly consultation. You count the number of times Agnes smiles in a week. 4, usually. 3 in bad weeks. Once, in the second week of December, when a sparrow landed on the window ledge outside and held still for 30 seconds with its head at the angle sparrows hold their heads, she smiled 5 times. You count the sparrow, 1 sparrow, for 30 seconds. You note it in the mental catalogue, if he had come. If Dr. Christie, the government inspector, had walked past the mopped corridors of Ward 4 and turned left instead of right, had followed the sound of the sewing and the smell of the ward through the door that is always locked from the outside, if he had done that, this is what he would have seen. A room 40 feet long and 20 feet wide containing 18 beds in 2 rows, beds approximately 2 feet apart from each other, measured in hand widths. 1 window, barred, facing an inner courtyard. 1 stove, cast iron, positioned at the east end, adequate for heating approximately the central third of the room, inadequate for the remaining 2/3. 1 table, 12 feet long, used for the morning sewing work. One lamp stand at each end of the room. Walls whitewashed in the style of 1850s institutional construction. The whitewash applied last in what Agnes estimates, by the shade of it, to be 1868 or 1869. The whitewash has absorbed 5 years of the ward's characteristic smell. You can confirm this by standing close to the wall and pressing your nose against the surface, which you've done, in the interest of empirical accuracy. The wall smells like the room. The room smells like the wall. They are by now the same substance. Floor, plank, original to the building, 1850, which means the floor is 23 years old and contains 23 years of mopping and spilled oatmeal and the specific cleaning products of successive eras, and, undeniably and permanently, the other things that seep into the floorboards of a ward where some patients cannot always manage the chamber pot. The inspector would have seen all of this, and then, if he had stayed long enough, sat down, taken out his notebook, and done the thing that makes the difference between a visit and an actual inspection, which is talk to the patients, he would have heard Agnes Fuller, Edinburgh, arithmetic and composition teacher, 11 years, full cognitive function minus the 4th and 5th decimal places. Harriet, who doesn't speak, but felt the grey wool of your shawl and said, blue. Margaret and the butter at the right temperature. Mrs. Connolly and Patrick called through the dark. You, Eleanor Haigh, clockmaker's daughter, letter writer. Woman who spent 11 minutes with a physician while her husband sat in the room. The inspector would have written something. Whether that something would have been enough is a different question. But he would have written something. He didn't come. He didn't come, so he didn't write something. And the ward contained exactly what it contained, and the annual report contained exactly what the annual report contained, which is a set of numbers about capacity and expenditure and the general condition of the institution's facilities, presented in the language of public administration, which is a language designed for legibility and unsuited for precision. You keep the precision here, in your head, in the 3 sheets of paper, in whatever comes after. March. You already told you this part. The morning Mrs. Pollock comes and says, Ward 4, there's a bed. But what you didn't say was the night before. You don't know it's the night before. You won't know it's the night before until the morning comes and Mrs. Pollock comes with it. Right now it's just a Tuesday night in March with the stove putting out its radius of warmth and the lamp making its yellowish mistranslation of every face, and the sounds of the ward doing their usual evening assembly into the hours. Mrs. Connolly is already asleep, her breathing slow and slightly rattling, the sound that's been there since October and that you've noted twice to Mrs. Pollock, who has noted it back, and that has not yet resulted in anything happening. Harriet is at the window. Harriet is always at the window in the evenings. Agnes is knitting. You're lying on your side, facing the wall, with the 3 sheets of paper held against your chest, your hands over them, the way you'd hold something you needed to keep warm. You're reviewing them in your head. The names, the dates, the facts. Agnes Fuller, born Edinburgh, 1833. Harriet, age approximately 22. Margaret, 3 years. Florence Mackay, gone before breakfast. Bed needed by supper. Mrs. Connolly, the rattling breath. You're in here too. Eleanor Haigh, 29 years old. On the evidence of other cases in this building, that could be the beginning of a much longer entry. On the evidence of your monthly consultation with Dr. Hendricks, something else. It's not certain. Nothing is certain until it's over, but it's possible. And possible, you've decided, is the thing worth protecting, not by treating it as likely, that's how hope becomes a liability, but by protecting the conditions that make it possible, keeping the mechanism running, the pump working, the water moving. Across the room, Agnes's needles click. Agnes, you say quietly. The needles don't stop. Mrs. Marsh. What was the name of your school in Edinburgh? A pause, the needles continue. Brougham Street, she says. The Brougham Street Methodist School for Girls. The building was red brick. There was a garden at the back where we grew vegetables with the older students. A pause. I know what you're doing. I know you know. It won't change anything. I know that too. The needles, the lamp, the December. No, March. It's March now. Cold pressing on the window glass. The headmistress's name was Miss Fairbairn, Agnes says. She had hair the colour of autumn grass, and she wore the same grey dress every Monday for 9 years. She gave me my position because I could teach arithmetic to children who had given up on arithmetic, which she considered more useful than giving it to children who were already good at it. A brief pause. She was right about that. She sounds remarkable. She was ordinary, Agnes says. She was completely ordinary. That was what made her remarkable. She was a woman who did her ordinary work extremely well every day for many years, and expected nothing exceptional from it. The needles. Write that down, she says, if you write things. I will. Write all of it down. For the first time in all these months, in all the cataloguing and compiling and quiet determined precision, you hear something different in Agnes's voice, still controlled, still the face that gives very little away. But underneath it, something urgent, something that has been waiting a long time to be asked for. Write the school, write the garden, write the vegetables, write Miss Fairbairn's grey dress. I'll write everything, you say. Because it existed, Agnes says. It existed before any of this, and it should be known that it existed. The room is quiet. It should be known, you say. The needles click. Harriet at the window turned slightly, not looking at you, not quite looking at anything, but turned, as if she heard something in the room that required this small orientation. Her profile in the lamplight. Still. Open. The city behind the glass doing its nighttime work. This is where the story rests, not ends. These stories don't end, that's the truth of them. Eleanor Haigh walks out on a June morning, and the story continues because Eleanor Haigh continues, and because Agnes Fuller continues inside, and because 18 women in a ward that the inspector didn't reach continue doing what they're doing right now in your mind, which is being real. They are real. That's the thing I want you to hold on to just for a moment, before you let it all go and let sleep come. They existed in rooms that nobody thought to look into. They woke up every morning on damp mattresses in November cold, and they opened their hands slowly to spare the cracked knuckles, and they ate the oatmeal, and they hemmed the sheets, and they kept the water moving, each of them with whatever they had. Agnes's knitting needles, Margaret's butter, Harriet's nails kept even, Eleanor's 3 sheets of paper. These are not dramatic instruments. They are the smallest possible tools for the largest possible work, which is the work of remaining a person when everything around you is arranged to make you something less than that. They use them anyway. Let the ward go quiet. Let the lamp go down to its last hour. Let the stove tick and settle. Let Mrs. Pollock make her final round. The key in the lock. The door opened 6 inches. The brief stripe of corridor light across the floor. The door closed again. and let the building settle into its December night sounds, the boiler and the stone, and the long, slow cooling of a structure that holds more than it was built to hold. Let the catalogue of names rest. Agnes Fuller, Harriet, Margaret, Mrs. Connolly, Florence Mackay, Eleanor Haigh. Let them rest. You're wherever you are tonight. Not in a ward 40 feet long, not on a mattress 2 feet from a stranger's breathing, not waiting for a lamp to be lit because there are only 6 hours of daylight left and it's already 3 in the afternoon. You have whatever you have around you. The particular warmth of the room you're in, the sounds that mean your version of home and night and safety. And the distance between you and that December ward is considerable. Centuries of considerable. And that distance is real. Feel it. Let yourself feel the specific ordinary luxury of it. The whole bed, the sufficient warmth, the window without bars on it, the ability to stand up right now if you wanted to, and walk out the door and down a street and be simply a person moving through the world with the unremarkable freedom of someone who hasn't had it taken. You can do that. Agnes couldn't. Not for 14 years. And still she knitted. Still she counted decimal places, even the missing ones. Still she said, write the school. Write Miss Fairbairn's grey dress. Write the garden, because it existed, and existing should be known. Let your breath slow, the way it slows when you stop asking anything of it. When you stop timing it or monitoring it or using it for anything other than the quiet maintenance of this moment, this body, this night. Longer on the exhale, the chest releasing, the weight of your hands settling into whatever they're resting on, the sounds around you becoming background, becoming weather. Somewhere in a building on Queen Street West that still stands. You can look it up if you want, it's still there. The architecture still doing its best impression of hope. The ward that was Ward 7 is something else now. The beds are gone. The stove is gone. The window that faced the inner courtyard has new glass in it, clear, unbarred. Agnes Fuller is in a record somewhere, a line in a report, a name, a date, a note. It isn't enough, but it's something. It's the beginning of a something. The blue shawl is not in a record anywhere. Harriet's mother's blue shawl, the kitchen table, the evenings, the warmth of a life that existed before a room 40 feet long, that exists only in the grey wool she touched, and in the fact that you are thinking about it now, which is what it means to give someone your attention. To say, your blue shawl existed. Your mother wore it. You felt it. It counts. Let sleep come. You are warm enough, fed enough, free enough. Let that be enormous quietly, without drama. Let it be the last thing you feel before you go under. The specific weight of that ordinary freedom, which is not ordinary at all, which is the thing that Agnes knitted through 14 winters to keep hold of, which is the thing Eleanor carried out the front door on a June morning, which is the thing you have right now and can let yourself feel, just for a moment, before the breath slows and the dark closes in and the night does what nights are for. Let the city go. Let the names rest. Let the hands be still. Let it all settle into the long, quiet patience of sleep, which does not ask for anything, which does not require managing, which is simply there, simply available, the only mercy that requires nothing in return. You've earned it. Take it. Good night.